All right, hello everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces, and thanks for those of you who showed up as well. So some of you have heard this talk before in different versions, but I think we've been essentially in business in this new center since the beginning of 2016. So it's been a year since we've really been trying to work and coalesce many of our efforts in the center. And I think that we really have achieved some milestones that I think encapsulate the title of this talk. And I think it's a great opportunity to review that and see where we are and where we're heading as a center, particularly if we want to support the rest of the community here at CHOP, both on the clinical and the research side. So I'll give a little bit of a background for this. And as you heard, my own initial interest in research was underpinned by my training as a neuroscientist, and I came to CHOP specifically to work on pediatric brain tumors, but then encountered severe challenges to actually fulfill that mission in ways that required a reassessment of the landscape of research and really began opening up opportunities for entirely new models of research that essentially expand beyond brain tumors, which I'll discuss today. So we'll use brain tumors as a model because many of the infrastructure that we have developed began in the context of brain tumors. Brain tumors are the leading cause of disease-related death in children. But unfortunately, unlike some of the other pediatric cancer spaces, and certainly unlike the adult enterprise, there's no available NIH data for pediatric brain tumors, particularly of the genomic type. And so for those of us who are interested in the molecular underpinnings of pediatric brain tumors, there's a dearth of data that really supports any hypothesis-driven research. And as a result, I came to CHOP to really try and address that. For those of us who are interested in doing basic research in the context of precision medicine or data generation, this is the traditional cycle that most of us enter here at CHOP or any academic institution. And while that cycle of research, I think, benefits the traditional model of doing research in many cases, for us in the pediatric space and rare disease space, we encounter severe challenges that I can highlight and then provide alternatives for. In my own case, as I came to CHOP, I really came to CHOP to partner with neurosurgeons and neuro-oncologists and pathologists to create the capacity to collect biospecimens, sequence those biospecimens and generate data for them, develop model systems based on the genomics of those tumors, publish my fancy paper in a Nature Cell Science paper, and then get promoted and get grants and succeed in a traditional academic setting. And most of us in the academic infrastructure are in this space of direct correlation between publication, primacy of discovery, grant acquisition, promotion, and the daily business of academic life. So I arrived at CHOP, and really I came here because of my capacity to really directly interact with the neurosurgery group here and my partner in crime, Jay Storm. And together really hatched the idea of collecting biospecimens from almost every single patient that came through neurosurgery and generating big data for both ourselves and the rest of the community to empower the pediatric brain tumor space. So that was in 2007 or so when I first arrived here, but it really took a large amount of time and a lot of effort by a number of people to actually fulfill that mission of the traditional academic cycle. So we actually published our first so-called big paper in Nature Genetics just this past year. So it took quite a bit of time to go from the process of collecting biospecimens to publication. And even though by all metrics, publication of a Nature Genetics paper, and the first author for the paper is Pyle, who is sitting somewhere. Raise your hand, Pyle. I think I saw you somewhere. Oh, there she is, right there. All right, so Pyle's an amazing graduate student. She did a lot of the work. But both she and I, and most of the team that participated in this effort, even though it was a successful narrative, witnessed really horrific failures from our perspective in our scientific mandate to accelerate discovery on behalf of children. It took us this amount of time, not because the research was that difficult, but because of a number of failures of the academic structure for making discoveries. The primary, most disheartening failure is that it took us more than 6 months to figure out the authorship order for this paper. We had to argue multiple times across multiple institutions, and everybody refused to sort of describe authorship either on alphabetical order or any other method. Eventually we came to some consensus, but it was a very dissatisfying approach. But the only way to actually do this kind of research in a rare disease space like pediatric brain tumors requires collaboration across multiple institutions who are going to be vying for primacy of discovery. A second failure is that it took us more than 1.5 years to actually just collect existing published data sets, right? So this paper's underpinning was the comprehensive analysis of newly generated genomic data paired with historical data that's been published on before for reanalysis to discover new types of brain tumors. But even published data that by all mandates requires second use and accessibility took us a year and a half to acquire. So for us, these 2 points of increased challenges to actually collaborate around data and limited access to data highlighted a real bottleneck in the pediatric space in ways that we decided to reassess and ask ourselves whether or not this is the model that really fully fulfills our mission here at CHOP and elsewhere to accelerate discovery on behalf of children from a precision medicine space. For us, if you look at the transition of genomic data generation, and many of us have seen curves like this. So this graph essentially shows on the left-hand side the number of genomes sequenced across time, and the right-hand side is the size of the data. And you can see that around the time that I arrived at CHOP, around 2006, 2007, there is this exponential shift. And that's because of some of the first platforms that are currently actually routinely in use here at CHOP and elsewhere. And so the price began to drop for data generation. The capacity to generate genomic data really accelerated in ways that by 2020 or so, there'll be more than 1 exabyte or between 1 exabyte and zettabyte of data. And for those of you who are not exabyte or zettabyte people, this is more data than essentially all of YouTube combined today. And if you think of the fact that currently my daughter and everybody else is here are uploading more than 300 hours of YouTube video per second into YouTube, it highlights for you the amount of data that's going to be generated over the next few years. And unfortunately for us, when we began this effort, the pediatric enterprise is nowhere on this exponential curve. The TCGA, the NIH's main initiative for cancer generation, currently is actually around 2.5, I think, or maybe more petabytes of available data in a really highly structured environment at the University of Chicago. But the pediatric enterprise is nowhere available to actually access these types of efforts. And why is that? So the TCGA was an effort really led by the NIH that essentially provided access to more than 11,000 cases across a diverse set of cancer arenas, and all of this data became public for the community to use. Public in ways that were really highly accessible and across multiple different spaces. The only paired environment that really strived to match the TCGA's effort in pediatric was an initiative called Target. For those of us interested in pediatric brain tumors, the disease was not represented, but we did learn a great deal from the Target and TCGA efforts. The first thing we learned is that if you make data publicly available and provide it to the community, people use it, particularly if they're easy-to-use portals. So here essentially is the use of Target on a portal called the CBio portal. So any one of you can actually log on to CBio portal. And you can see that across time of the past 3 years, there have been more than 15 million page hits on the CBio portal accessing adult cancer data. The Target data, the pediatric data that was generated in part by NIH support, has its own separate portal, but unfortunately you see no growth in use and only a few peaks of largely, I think, developmental implementations on the platform. So only 2,000 page hits versus 15 million. And the difference between the amount of data is not 7,500-fold. It's really an issue of accessibility. And this was one of the first lessons that I think is important for the pediatric and rare disease community to understand is that while there is value for segregation of pediatric data to harness its visibility and its unique access for the stakeholders who are interested in pediatric data, segregating it from the main flow of the research efforts in the community essentially silos the approach, and very little use actually gets encountered in that arena. The other thing is that the Target data is actually much more restricted. Even I was struggling to actually get access to Target data. And so for us, in reviewing our own challenges and our own pediatric community's challenges in doing research, we came to the recognition that if the pediatric enterprise was really going to try and compete for resources and discovery on behalf of their patients, ownership of data and primacy of discovery under traditional academic practices, while it may serve certain individuals or unique individuals in traditional academic workflows, by and large, it will fail the pediatric community as a whole to really integrate into an exponentially growing space. And for us, we really saw the pediatric community as an edge case. Really, we are an environment that's highly specialized, generating much of our own data independent of the NIH, and actually work in that environment at the edge of the mainstream for much of the adult enterprise. And so for us, we really began looking at how can we change that landscape, and what are the opportunities to both match our own mandate of accelerating discoveries on behalf of patients and actually succeed and sustain that research enterprise. And so we really began learning from other information-driven economic systems, and really thought about creating a collaboration or research ecosystem driven by collaboration, where competing to actually share data could actually drive data dissemination. Like I said, we used pediatric brain tumors as a model, one, because the NIH hadn't yet addressed it, and two, because we had really the capacity here at CHOP to lead by example. Neurosurgery, neuro-oncology, and pathology came together to really describe an enterprise that was going to really subvert the traditional model of academic data and use of biospecimen. And in 2009, and actually full launch in 2011, the Children's Brain Tumor Tissue Consortium was founded. This consortium was underpinned by an attempt to get a number of pediatric institutions to collaborate and centralize biospecimens in ways that, again, challenged or at least addressed some of the failures that we had learned from the TCGA or NIH efforts in the pediatric and adult spaces. We are going to leverage the CHOP's BioRC environment. CHOP has an amazing BioRC group here. David Stokes, who's I think somewhere in the back, also raising his hand, leads this effort. CHOP has invested heavily in an institutional biorepository. But in order to convince people to actually centralize resources at CHOP in ways that would not compete, we had to engage the trust of the community. And in order to do that, we had to really fully engage the informatic and platforms that would allow any user in the world to transparently assess that CHOP is actually a good steward of biospecimens and data, providing equal and paired access to the entire community. And so early on, we worked with the BioRC and the BBHI group here at CHOP to begin developing platforms that would allow investigators to transparently assess what is in the biorepository, who's using it, who's making requests, and really linking the LIMS management system of the biorepository to the data that's being generated in those spaces. We began with 4 institutions, and once you have 4 institutions, Chicago, Seattle, Pittsburgh, and CHOP, working together, and foundations and other entities begin to recognize your efforts, there's opportunity to suddenly become the so-called, cool table in the lunchroom, and many other institutions want to join simply for the visibility of partnering in these efforts. And so today we're at more than 13 institutions who have come together to centralize biospecimens in one location. And once you do that, you can see that growth can really take off. And today we're actually at more than 12,000 aliquots in the biorepository. Importantly, and this is a lesson we learned from the NIH effort, unless you actually mandate standard protocols and SOPs for biospecimen collection, each institution may do its own thing in ways that could subvert your capacity to actually utilize biospecimens downstream. And so in the context of a consortium, we're actually able to mandate a collection of high quality specimens across multiple different formats that could really empower a number of different assays. And importantly, everybody had to standardize their practices in this way so that all the biospecimens entering the biorepository were highly QC'd for quality and use. In addition to transparency of what biospecimens are there, we also recognize that one of the key features that was missing in terms of depth in many large-scale efforts was longitudinal data. Anybody can potentially sequence a specimen and generate data, but what really differentiates our capacity to interpret the meaning of that data is going to be the clinical outcomes and the high dimensionality of the data that we actually generate in the clinical setting. So early on, again, we worked with BBHI to create informatics systems that allow us to capture data in a longitudinal fashion. And to date, we are actually one of maybe 2 such efforts in the country that actually enable longitudinal clinical data collection and actually make that data available in a public way connected to a biospecimen repository. Actually, if you add in that second requirement of connected to biospecimen repository, I think we're the only data architecture that actually allows that to happen. Importantly, anybody in the world can actually log on to the biorepository portal. here's where you see the shift of the effort. Instead of the consortium itself or Adam Resnick's laboratory generating the data and providing it to the community, what we really want is to pull the community and their resources into the environment that we're generating. There aren't enough neuro-oncologists doing pediatric brain tumor research, so how can we ever fulfill the mandate of empowering the data fully unless we pull other non-neuro-oncologists or anybody who's interested in a certain gene or a certain pathway into this space? So anybody can actually log on to the cdtpc portal.org, propose projects. The projects get reviewed very transparently. And what the consortium does is the consortium essentially ensures stewardships of best use of samples, that we maximize the amount of data coming out of the sample, and the only requirement for users is to deposit the data back into the consortium. Once we have a highly annotated biospecimen of high quality, multiple different types of specimens, and that data from the biospecimen perspective, how much DNA, how much tumor, and what aliquots you have, once that data is integrated into the clinical and phenotypic data so that people can create cohorts and begin generating molecular data, the next phase was how do you actually display and provide that data as an accessible format to the rest of the community, and link that data back into the cycle of the biospecimen workflow. So 2 summers ago, the CBio portal platform, that portal where we had 50 million page hits from the TCGA, that portal that was initially funded by the TCGA, that grant essentially finalized, and working with MSK, Princess Margaret, and Dana-Farber, CHOP essentially acquired the open source code for the CBio portal, and we initiated a PED CBio portal instance for this. Now again, we had learned our lesson that when the previous efforts in the pediatric community had attempted to create their own portals, nobody wanted to use the data. So what were we going to do differently in this case is actually bring in all of the NIH's data. So in this instance of PED CBio portal, we have actually brought in the entirety of the public NIH data, but we are now adding in our own data and other pediatric data. So in many ways, if you were to assess who has the most data-rich portal, you know, the CBio portal NIH data or the PED CBio portal, any user who's agnostic to their query and just want to query the largest amount of data would come to the PED CBio portal. And for us, this is the pull mechanism. You don't have to be interested in pediatric cancer to come to PED CBio portal because you can ask any question you would ask anywhere else. And at every step from here on, we essentially adopted this model, is that we have to bring the world's data to the pediatric community, and with that data, pull the rest of the world into our own data sets of interest and biospecimens of interest to truly empower discovery in that space. More importantly, you're not going to only provide data visualization. In the portal, users can actually make requests and link that data to the actual specimen and make secondary requests for that specimen for new data type generation. And again, that's something that's very poorly empowered anywhere else. Even in other data sets, if a user makes a query, makes a discovery, they have to validate the discovery in a new cohort or a new data set as opposed to actually come back to the actual biospecimen from which that data was generated. For us, this opportunity of going from biospecimen, the actual analog space, to the digital space of clinical informatics that not only includes deep phenotype and clinical data, but also imaging, pathology report, ops report, pathology slides. That data then connected to the genomic data space that's now contextualized in the world's entirety of the NIH data, at least initially, provides the first step to fully empowering discovery. And once we began doing that, the failure space historically for discovery became very apparent. So I'm going to give you just one example of the mandate and urgency that we feel in this context. For those of us who are working in pediatric brain tumors, one of the hallmark of failures for us is a disease called DIPG, diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma. These tumors occur in the brainstem of patients, and no matter how good of a surgeon you are, there's nothing you can do to really surgically intervene. And currently we have no therapies for these patients, and as you can see there at the bottom of the survival therapeutic index here, of nobody surviving longer than a year. Fortunately for the community, around 2011 or so, 2 landmark papers from fantastic scientists did some sequencing analysis of the genomes of pediatric brain tumor samples from DIPG patients and really defined an entirely new model for how oncology can occur through histone mutations. So histones are these proteins around which DNA is wound that control the expression of genes. And these two papers really define a new model for epigenetic dysregulation through histone modification and alteration. 3 years later or so, those same groups plus two other additional groups identified that 1/5 of those patients actually had a second mutation in another gene called ACVR1. And while there are no therapies to actually address the histone mutations at the time, ACVR1 is a kinase that actually can be targeted by small molecules and potentially provides opportunities to target the disease if indeed ACVR1 ends up being a oncogenic driver for the cancers. So this would be the traditional endpoint of any story, right? You study a disease, you make some discovery, you study it a little bit more, you make a second discovery, and you move on. The challenge is once you integrate the data, you recognize that there are failure spaces that the community faced. One is that the exact same mutation that's in 1/5 of those patients was actually discovered previously in 2006 in another rare disease, non-cancer. So FOP, Fibrodysplasia, ossificans, and progressiva, is another rare disease, even more rare than DAPG. Most of us here at CHOP are aware of it because Fred Kaplan across the street at Penn made a discovery for FOP. But the exact same mutation that drives essentially FOP occurs in the exact same amino acids in DIPG patients 1/5 of the time. But because the data in 2011 was never integrated with any other data set, because that data from the pediatric groups that did those studies was not empowered for secondary discovery, nobody made the connection. Nobody saw that in two rare diseases you have the exact same mutation and biology must be conservative in some way. Furthermore, actually, if you even cared about cancer, because the pediatric data was actually never integrated with the adult data space, people missed that actually in adult cancer patients, uterine and stomach cancer, again, the exact same amino acid mutation was present. Now, the uterine cancer people and the stomach cancer people are not paying attention to this because it's too small of a cohort. But again, any automatic caller, the minute you see the exact same amino acid mutations across two different cancers and another rare disease, any biologist can actually surmise that the data suggests that there's meaning behind that mutation. So we actually didn't have to wait 3 years to make that discovery. And we don't yet know whether or not targeting ACVR1 would be therapeutically meaningful for DIPG patients, but we had to wait 3 years to initiate the clinical trials. If it does end up being that targeting ACVR1, right, that second mutation that was discovered, is meaningful, it means that for 3 years, 60 patients a year in the United States failed to benefit from that. And if it actually ends up being curative, which it's unlikely to do so, but still means 180 patients died or suffered more than they should have for no reason at all, except that data wasn't empowered. And that proximity of impact between the data and its application in the clinical space is where we're at in the age of precision medicine. And the mandate for us is to really respect that discovery opportunity. When we did our first study across the genomes of low-grade gliomas, the other thing that we discovered is that, to our surprise, and we're not the only ones who have seen this, when we analyze the whole genome sequencing of patients, and then St. Jude or CHOP or TGen or any commercial company analyze that data, the Venn diagram of overlap from the interpretive space of the genomic is actually fairly poor across all those pipelines. Not because it's actually fairly difficult to analyze the 1 billion base pairs of a genome and determine what mutations are simply imparting good looks to someone versus what mutations are actually driving the cancer. We're not the only one who recognize this challenge, and even the NIH itself recognized that 11,000 cohort of patients in the adult cancer space was largely only analyzed by a handful of people who were able to download those terabytes of data to their local institutions and reanalyze that data space. As a result, the NIH launched a couple of efforts to fully maximize the output from that investment in the TCGA, that adult data space. One was the launch of the Genomic Data Commons at the University of Chicago, and the second was the launch of the NCI Cancer Clouds. The NCI, or National Cancer Institute Cancer Clouds, was an attempt to put the data in a cloud environment that would remove the threshold for people to actually have to download the entirety of data to their own institutional space, providing essentially access to data paired with a compute environment that any one of us can essentially log on to if we have access to the data and use the cloud environment for the data. For us, this was a great idea because moving data around we had experienced took more than a year and a half to accomplish in many of our instances. And so we essentially were disappointed that initially those efforts were restricted to adult enterprise. So we reached out to the NCI Cloud pilot contracts, there were 3 of them, and Seven Bridges Genomics, who essentially is an NIH trusted partner in this effort with the NCI, agreed to partner with us to develop a pediatric environment. But again, just like the history had taught us before, we didn't want a pediatric environment that was siloed and separate from the adult efforts. We had to guarantee, and this is why we chose Seven Bridges to begin with, to guarantee that the data that we generated and ported into this cloud environment for the community could also be intersected with the adult data space that was being uploaded to the NCI cloud, and that's something that Seven Bridges could do. Cavatica is the last name from Charlotte, from Charlotte's Web. So Charlotte the spider's last name is Cavatica. That's because E.B. White knew his biology, and the brown spider's scientific name is Cavaticus. And so we borrowed that from them to really harness the narrative around the saving of an innocent life destined to death by the collaborative efforts of a very diverse farm animal landscape in our academic ecosystem. And so for us, Cavatica is the next wave, right? So we have a biorepository with deep clinical and phenotypic data. We've done our own analysis that anybody can view in a portal and access compared to the NIH analysis. But what we really want is for people to play with the data, right? We think we're pretty amazing at playing with the data, and many of our players are actually here in the audience. But there might be a possibility that somebody else out there in the world can play better with the data than us, or potentially they want to bring their own data and play together with 2 different data sets that we don't have access to together right now. So Cavatica launched as part of the Cancer Moonshot this past October, and that means that essentially anybody in the world can sign on to the Cavatica cloud environment, run their own pipelines, run our pipelines, try to reproduce our data, try to reproduce somebody else's data. And 2 things that are present in Cavatica are important. 1, connectivity to the NIH data. 2, the deposition of our own data efforts. And 3, the capacity for us to bring other people's data into that environment. Importantly, within the next 3 months or so, the entirety of our own brain tumor biorepository will be sequenced. This is thanks to the work of the BioRC group and many of the operations team as part of our center. That entirety of whole genome sequencing and RNA-seq across more than 1,600 patients will flow into Cavatica. Analyzed data will flow into the CBio portal, and anybody in the world will have access to pediatric brain tumor data of this size for the first time in mankind's history, thanks to the dedication of all of the institutions that have centralized their biospecimens and committed to data deposition in advance of publication. So the data actually becomes available for the community to discover even before we publish the first paper on it. And to our knowledge, it's never been done. As far as we know, no such data set has ever been empowered in this way. But in our sense, this is what really fulfills the mandate to accelerate discovery on behalf of patients. So Computational actually sits outside this network, which again I borrowed from the University of Chicago Genomic Data Commons PowerPoints. Computational is outside of the NIH science, but can connect and intersect with it. And really, the next portion is what I hope we can communicate here. We're priming the Computational space with NIH data and brain tumor data. But one thing that the NCI will always struggle to fulfill is interdisease analysis. But those of us here in the pediatric community are well aware that there's great value in looking across neuro-oncology, autism, epilepsy, or birth defect, and that there are syndromic and other types of diseases that we can actually empower through genomic integration. On the NCI side, they cannot support or subsidize autism data. And the autism NIH cohorts are not going to be intersected with the cancer space. But in Computational, in our own effort, that's the mandate. So now we also have autism, epilepsy, and birth defect data in Computational. And really, it's a home for all pediatric and rare diseases for deep analysis. So we have this continuous flow between the biorepository and big data in Computational, and people coming back to the biorepository to generate more hypothesis-driven questions. I've talked about a couple of different portals that are available to essentially query the clinical space across longitudinal clinical data on DBHI's Harvest platform, query the genomic data visualization on the PC Bio portal. And one of the next portals that we'll be developing is the pathology slide and an imaging portal, where people who are interested in the imaging data sets can actually query those spaces. And all along, our goal was to intersect across what is a very diverse stakeholder space and almost professionalize the activities for discovery in our efforts to really fully pull everybody in. Two initial initiatives for this first year in 2017 that are going to use these platforms. One is the Computational Project Open. The lesson from the DAPG, diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma efforts, really highlights the deficit of opportunity as a result of lack of access. So very shortly, the DAPG Open initiative will launch, and we've managed to convince essentially the world's DIPG community, all the research that have ever generated data for DIPG, to centralize the entirety of mankind's DIPG knowledge in Computational, and all the data that we generated from our own efforts will also go into the Computational space under the DIPG. And more importantly, we have DIPG foundations, the community, who are sponsoring new projects in this environment. So here we're layering in the other stakeholders. So foundations who raise money for DIPG research are now aligned with supporting research in this environment for the community. Again, ensuring the proper alignment with acceleration of discovery. And so the DIPG Open Project is one of the first models where sustainability of research through foundation and funding mechanisms integrates with the platform of openness in this space. A second initiative will launch actually early in February called the PC4C, the Philadelphia Coalition for a Cure. We have a unique opportunity at CHOP. We're a pediatric enterprise. We train most of Philadelphia's residents and fellows, even from other adult institutions in the pediatric domain. So that makes us in many ways, the Switzerland of Philadelphia, because all the other institutions are obviously, from an economic perspective, competing against each other for patients and primacy of care. So CHOP really sits in a nidus of a space where Temple, Drexel, Cooper, and Jeff and Penn really are competing in the adult enterprise, but we already know the value of adult and pediatric integration. So we proposed working with commercial entities and, even more importantly, with payers, here it's Independence Blue Cross, to initiate a collaboration that all of these institutions might align together to begin vetting diagnostic platforms, and for all that data that begins to be generated in the diagnostic clinical space could flow into a common enterprise. And for us, this was a unique opportunity because all of these institutions currently have some form of clinical diagnostics that's next generation based, panels or some other tests, but none of them are really using much larger platforms like whole exome or whole genome for analysis. So paired with commercial entities, probably by the end of February, we'll launch an observational clinical trial where any neuro-oncology patient that comes to Philadelphia could actually receive clinical whole genome sequencing and RNA-seq for interpretation in that space across any of those institutions that are all going to use the same platform. All of the data will flow through CHOP for analysis and availability into the widespread community. That kind of partnership that pairs adult enterprises through collaboration paired with payers who are paying for clinical tests where the data is immediately available for secondary use and research in a de-identified fashion through workflows that flow through our architecture, that's the ultimate vision. We just came back from the JP Morgan conference, a conference that centralizes many of the commercial efforts in big pharma. And in that conference, Illumina, one of the leading companies who essentially generates machines for sequencing genomes, announced that by the year's end, essentially will cost $100 or so to sequence the whole genome of any patient. When the cost basis is $100, that's no longer going to be the competitive landscape. You're not going to be able to compete against somebody for the amount of data that you generate. The only competitive space you have is how you integrate, analyze, and empower that data. And that is why the platform is really the authentic competitive space that actually aligns with the mandate of our efforts here. Platform that centralize and pull data into them, not the data generation itself or data ownership, are going to be the differentiators. Because very soon, any community hospital will be able to sequence the genomes of patients. Patients will be able to sequence their own genomes and moving forward. When patients begin being capable of generating their own data, when essentially the data begins to be generated in the clinical space as opposed into the research laboratory, suddenly there's a shift in the question of who's the producer and who's the consumer. In healthcare, most of the times when people say consumers, they're talking about the patient themselves. But when patients' data are generated on the clinical side, they actually own their data in ways that actually makes them the producer. Platforms that essentially allow some ambiguity around who are the producers, consumers, who owns the data, and who releases the data, I think are the next wave for us. And one of the ways that we can highlight that is just by a case example, albeit an extreme one. This is Stephen Keating, who essentially had a brain tumor in Boston, and by chance, it was a chance discovery, but Stephen is enrolled at MIT and was highly dedicated to technology and data. And so when he was identified with a brain tumor, he essentially began posting and depositing all of his own healthcare data in his own web environment. He posted the scans, he actually videotaped his surgery, posted the videotape of the surgery. All of his healthcare records went live in the website, and he had a very large following looking at his disease progress. He then asked for his own genome data that was actually being used for research at the time, and the answer was no. We don't release research data to patients themselves. But because he has such a strong following on the social media side, eventually the university capitulated and did give him his genomic data, and he uploaded his own data into his own web space environment. Then he asked for his own tumor tissue because he wanted to do his own IDH1 staining to assess the tumor. Here, the university system said no and stuck to no. And so Stephen then, as an MIT student cross-applied to Harvard to medical school, got accepted, began Harvard Medical School, did a independent study for pathology on his own tumor, did the IDH1 staining, quit medical school, and took that, that slide and published it online. Now, Stephen is a highly unique individual. He has a TED Talk. I encourage you to look at it. But this is not a unique example for us. Our patient populations were identified with a rare disease, go home, log online, find their highly educated community. That community is highly educated and tells them, even if they don't know basic biology, make sure when you go to CHOP, ask them to do a whole genome sequence, right? Their clinicians may be able to argue against it, tell them, no, don't listen to Facebook, but the community itself organizes and advocates for data, advocates for the deposition, the freeing of the data, and the access to data, because these patients oftentimes don't have cures. And so even though they oftentimes engage trust with the healthcare system, invariably on behalf of their children, they search and advocate on their behalf. And so it won't be very long, and we see it right now, where every patient is going to be asking for this type of integration. That's why we now have more than essentially 60 foundations aligned with many of our efforts supporting these initiatives. And none of these initiatives are brand new in concept. Really, they are the birth or the product of the birth of the information age and the internet age. Now, this is a quote that's one of our favorite, which really highlights that companies like Airbnb that essentially overturn the housing industry, or Uber, the taxi business, what these companies shift in focus is from ownership of a hotel to connectivity of a user to what they want. That connectivity between users or consumers and what they want, and the capacity to interchange them, right? You can both log on to Airbnb and find somewhere to stay, or make your own home somewhere to stay. That interchangeability of the consumer-provider space and ambiguity infusion, deprofessionalization of those efforts is what essentially overturned almost any information industry from the hotel industry to the music industry. And for us, healthcare is the last space. Healthcare and education are probably the two spaces that are going to fall under this. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we face. However, for us, the opportunity is to really align with the NIH itself and the White House.
A hospital here, a hospital there, a doctor here, a lab there. And so the goal here is if we can pool and create a common database of ultimately 1 million people that's diverse, so that they have a lot of genetic variation. We can now take a disease that may be relatively rare, but because we have a pretty large sample size and start seeing patterns that we might not have seen before. But a couple things that requires. It requires, first of all, us understanding who owns the data. Right? And I would like to think that if somebody does a test on me or my genes, that's mine. But that's not always how we define these issues, right? So there's some legal issues involved. In terms of the model that we use for health records that hopefully will be digitalized more and more, companies help hospitals keep and collect that data, and they should get paid for that. They're building software, they're building an infrastructure. On the other hand, we don't want that data just trapped. So if I am sick and voluntarily I want to join with other people who have a similar disease than mine and donate our data to help accelerate cures, I've got to be able to work with the electronic health record companies to make sure that I can do that easily, right? And there may be some commercial resistance to that we have to talk about, although we're seeing some terrific participation now, and that's part of what we're announcing, of those companies in terms of helping that happen. There's privacy issues. We've got to figure out how do we make sure that if I donate my data to this big pool, that it's not going to be misused, that it's not going to be commercialized in some way that I don't know about. And so we've got to set up a series of structures that make me confident that if I'm making that contribution to science, that I'm not going to end up getting a bunch of spam, targeting people who have a particular disease I may have. And so across the board, what we're trying to do is just make sure that all the various players in the healthcare system, including the researchers themselves, are invested in us building this broader capacity. Because this can potentially also change how we do research. Right now, what happens is, the best researchers and the best universities, oftentimes, they're kind of hoarding their samples because, apparently, I'm not a researcher, but that's
never too late, Mr. President.
Yeah.
So this is essentially an event that we were invited to, and you can see much of the language that the Obama administration acquired was language that I actually just described throughout my talk, and that's no accident. I think there are clear rationales around the Precision Medicine Initiative and then later the Moonshot Initiative that in ways that were somewhat surprising, really challenged the traditional NIH model for doing research. But the challenge is really how to compete in this environment. And what you'll notice is more and more entities are now coming up and saying, we have a database to compete, to share, or to provide data to it. The challenge is really to assess differences in that competition landscape. What does sharing really mean? What are the timelines for embargo? How does that actually intersect with the traditional academic space? How do people still get promoted if they're willing to put their data up in the cloud environment before publication? So the landscape is going to be very rapidly changing in a number of different ways that I think CHOP especially has a leg up, particularly through many of the efforts I just described. And so for us, much of this underpinned the formation of the Center for Data-Driven Discovery in Biomedicine at the beginning of 2016. And while we use brain tumors as the initial, essentially example case, right, lead by example in that space, what we've been doing along the way is really building a center architecture such that it can be agnostic of disease. Again, because we understand that intersecting across diseases, intersecting across ages, creating that landscape of opportunity for discovery can finally truly empower researchers like myself or anybody else to do the kind of hypothesis-driven research that we want. The center has really formulated and grown to represent a large number of people that are here. We have more than 50 people in the center that really get binned into individual working environments to support both CHOP's local research interest in data-driven initiatives and larger national landscape. And I'll just go through them to give you a flavor of the groups that essentially comprise the center, in the hopes that if any of you have any projects, clinical trials, biospecimen-driven research initiatives, or data-driven initiative questions, the center can be a place for you to intersect with. We have a clinical research unit that essentially addresses observational, interventional trial support, regulatory management, subject management, and clinical data collection and QC. And this really represents, I think, a clear differentiator in many published genomic studies, which is the clinical and phenotypic data, longitudinal data is oftentimes absent. We have a clinical informatics and digital health data research unit that essentially transforms any data, whether it's clinical trial data like the CRUs or any other electronic health record data into research data. And that's important. The 21st Century Cures Act that was just passed about a month ago mandated, as you saw from Obama, that electronic health record commercial vendors actually provide APIs, or essentially portals into the electronic health record. Essentially meaning that any patient who consents to the use of the electronic health record can provide access to anybody in the world into, let's say, CHOP's EPIC system, right, through the API. That possibility engenders a capacity to actually integrate electronic health records, which are still challenging to do research on in a number of different ways. The center, of course, has its bread and butter component of Biospecimen research unit. This is the unit that essentially works very closely with David Stokes' team and the BioRC to support the curation and collection of biospecimens. Surgery, as a department here at CHOP, is highly committed to essentially making every single patient that comes through the surgical arena a research subject with those biospecimens not uniquely available to any one group, but actually to anybody here who wants to do research. The Diagnostic research group, is the group that essentially works on the clinical side to do and drive forward clinical diagnostic. Marilyn Lee's team, essentially in the cancer space, Nancy Spinner on the genetic side, are leading the efforts to create genetic tests for our patient populations here at CHOP. Capturing that data and bringing it into the research arena or helping define what research should be done to develop new clinical tests is a key effort of the center. We work very closely with those people through this group. The laboratory environment itself has highly dedicated efforts that are, again, subverting the traditional laboratory understanding, which is much of our efforts are focused on cell line development, animal clinical or preclinical model development, immunotherapy target identification, and drug and combinatorial targeting efforts. So again, if any of the workflows that come out from any efforts, particularly in cancer, fall into this group, our laboratory hopes to support these preclinical spaces, and interactions in that space with many commercial vendors like Big Pharma is already underway. Much of the effort that I described as the platform development is a product of the Bioinformatics and Computational Biology group. Many of them are here, and many of them are actually dual citizens of both the center and DEHI. We work very closely with the Department of Biomedical Health and Informatics, and we're grateful for that partnership. We not only generate data, analyze data, build platforms, and bring in data, but we support the community's capacity to use that data and make discoveries. Paired with large big data efforts is the need to assess and reevaluate where does this work actually happen. Much of the work I described occurs in a cloud-based environment, and that interaction between cloud environments and local environments requires tight integration between the IS infrastructure of the hospital and the research environment and our own center's efforts. And again, we have a scientific computing and data security unit that essentially works very closely with us, and again, dual citizenship of the center and the DEHI. And together, these 7 groups, as a highly integrated environment, follow a patient through the entire course, at least for many of these patients, through the initial introduction to CHOP, through surgery, the biospecimen collections, the diagnostic space, the use of their data, and further implementation of their data for the next patient that follows right behind them. And that's the model that we want to essentially empower, not only for brain tumors, but across all domains. And so we're a very open center with open doors. Many of us are on the 4th floor of Colquitt. Please feel free to stop by and ask any questions or look for any additional opportunities for collaborations. Collaboration is in our DNA, as it were. So thanks so much, and we look forward to additional conversations.